Welcome to Wholesale Change, the webcast and podcast from Distribution Strategy Group, where we provide thought leadership for wholesale change agents like you. I mean, if you're on this call, you are very probably a wholesale change agent. Now, let me welcome in my trusted business partner and advisor, the ace of analytics, the tower of analytical power, the doctor of distribution, Jonathan Bine, PhD. How you doing, Jonathan?
Coming from Ian Heller, the very, very smart feller. That's quite a compliment. I'm doing well.
Like I always say, kidneys, man, kidneys.
Okay.
So today's topic is a pretty fun one. Should you build your own marketplace? And this is happening out there, right?
More and more. We get more evidence of it every time we interact with the market, every time we talk to our customers, every time we do a survey. So
Yeah. And we've talked to some of the one of the providers of these independent marketplaces. So let's hop in. And first of all, we want to promote something. So this is free. So we're not asking for your credit card, but we have collaborated with the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors to produce the first research report in a series of 7. This one's called The Coming Storm of Converging Technologies. And it's the story of how artificial intelligence and other technologies are driving new competition in wholesale. They're also raising customer expectations. And it's really changing the landscape and the competitive dynamics. You can go to the URL there to download the report, or you can just go to new.org, and it's in the rotating banner on the top of their homepage right now. There's a webinar coming out July 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Really covers the same material with a little bit of Q&A involved. But this report and this series really should be the definitive look at technology-driven transportation and the transformation in the industry. So we'll hope you'll check it out. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is define what a marketplace is. It's an e-commerce site where products or services are provided by many third parties, in some cases millions of third parties. The transactions are processed by the marketplace operators. That's from Wikipedia. So, a lot of us know of Uber, right? Well, Uber is not a fleet owner. I mean, they actually have leased a few cars, but they only do that because they have superior leasing rates and they lease them back to drivers. They're not a fleet operator. The fleet is primarily made up of independent individuals who are using their own cars, but all of the billing takes place on Uber. So it's a way to scale assets across a platform. Most of us are familiar with eBay, where millions of people sell stuff to other people, but the transaction settlement happens on eBay. And you can see some others here, but the point is you have many, many, many sellers transacting on one location. It's not, the classic retailer distributor model where you have one seller who's managing all the inventory and the fulfillment. You have many in this case. So that's a marketplace. That's, basic definition, but probably necessary. Do you want to add anything to that, Dr.
Well,
Bine?
I think if you look at the channel value proposition, the channel value proposition is to create an efficiency for suppliers and customers, right? Instead of end suppliers selling to M customers, you have end suppliers selling to a set of channel intermediaries or distributors selling to M customers, and that creates an efficiency. And there's a way in which this is just taking that efficiency of putting in a middle player that aggregates product and assortment to another level, right? So it's taking the channel value proposition of that aggregation to another level by bringing together multiple distributors in one location, or multiple manufacturers, as the case may be.
Yeah, I think it also reflects that customer expectations have changed over time. Like I remember when, in discussions many years ago, when distributors would talk about, pooling inventory, or even if you had a single distributor with multiple warehouses, one of the things you really sweated over was consolidating the delivery, right? So if I had, 5 SKUs, the customer didn't want 3 shipments. It was annoying to them. It was unacceptable. And if you had 20 SKUs, you'd get 10 shipments, and customers would complain about receiving. I mean, that issue has just gone away.
We've been retrained, haven't we?
Yeah. I mean, now, and obviously it's not just Amazon, but Amazon too. You're used to placing, several line item order, and you get several deliveries. And it's weird how we were just obsessed with solving that problem like 15 years ago or a decade ago, and now you don't even hear about it. When's the last time you heard anybody even mention it?
It's been a few years, to be
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Anyway, so that's changed the game. But what's happening now is there are industry entities. Two of these are companies. One's a buying group within wholesale distribution who are building their own marketplaces. So DigiKey on the left launched theirs back in October of 2019, and they've got a lot of comprehensive information. They have a whole brochure you can download. And this is really the electronic components industry marketplace. This is built on Miracle software. We'll talk about them in a little while. And it's admirable. I think, DigiKey's been known as an innovator. So this is an innovative thing to do. It'll be interesting to see if, other big distributors, Arrow and Avnet, and Newark, et cetera, are going to join in. What do you think? You think that's going to happen?
When you say join in, you mean participate in DigiKeys or do their own?
Participate in DigiKeys.
That's a good question. I know DigiKey's reaching out to some players beyond the traditional electronics market.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so they are looking at not just those SKUs. Certainly the ones you mentioned have enough muscle to do it on their own. I think the place where DigiKey really is strong is, they've created a business where, as of a couple of years ago, high 80% of their revenue was going through shopping cart or something electronic.
Yeah.
And I mean, they've just crushed it. They've actually become kind of a destination if you're looking for electronic components. Whether you end up buying a DigiKey or not, there's a good chance you're going to look to DigiKey first as a place to find the information.
Yeah, and I think this category is kind of interesting because it's very specification and attribute driven.
Mm-hmm.
So if you need some kind of microprocessor or passive component, and you're an electrical engineer, which I would assume most of their customers are, or they work in electrical design and engineering and maintenance, you have specifications you have to match. They're not optional. And I remember, when I was in the electronic components business, competing with them 18 years ago or 20 years ago, they even then had great, what we called at the time, parametric search.
So question for you, based on that experience and based on all you've learned since then, all the neurons that have fired, when you look at that space, which is got sort of DigiKey focused on designer, got the bigger players focused on production supply, meaning part of an OEM play, how do you see marketplaces serving either of those segments?
Great question, and I would love to hear your answer, but since you asked me, I'll go first. I think it plays much better in for selling to design engineers and electronic maintenance people. I think it's unnecessary to do big production orders. What do you think?
That would seem right, because what happens on the production orders is you typically have a go-to supplier, right? And there's scheduled orders, there's a whole logistic process around the way that's managed. And I don't know that optimizes well or is in a marketplace setting.
Yeah, and I think, DigiKey's been really the leader for those kind of small lot orders. And so they're kind of a natural to build a marketplace. And, to some degree, my concern, I applaud them. I think it's great that they're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Part of my concern is I wonder if everybody's going to try to build their own marketplace. Because if you do that, you don't have marketplaces unless everybody sells on each other's, right?
Well, yeah, we've talked about the model where you're able to aggregate and present a much broader set of SKUs and items, because through the back end, you've actually got access to a marketplace, but it's presenting through your website. So I think that's a more likely scenario to me than everybody building their own marketplace.
Yeah, got it. Yeah. All right. Well, I think DigiKey is, they're off to a good start. It looks like, at least if you read their literature, they're kind of interesting, having studied them for a long time, because they're really transparent for a company that has no need to be. I mean, they're privately held, right? But they disclose a lot of information, And I'm not really sure why, but as an analyst, I appreciate it because it's not that hard to tell what's going on at DigiKey, and they're very proud of what they've accomplished, which they should be. So it doesn't surprise me that they're the first mover in this market. And I think, I don't know if they have the broadest line, but they probably have one of the broadest lines, and they may have the broadest line in electronic components distribution. And they're pretty global, at least for a conventional distributor. So they appear to me to be positioned well to manage this marketplace. I just think it's going to be a really interesting case study, along with Zorro, who we'll talk about in a minute, to see whether or not direct competitors are going to jump on board.
Right. I'm pining to know. You mentioned they divulge information. Do you happen to know how profitable they are?
I don't know their profit margin off the top of my head, and I don't know that they disclose that. They disclose their sales growth, and that I've read them disclose things like employee count and some of their growth plans, but I don't remember if they've divulged their profit margin. That would kind of surprise me, but I bet it's really strong.
I presume that the focus on the design engineers is much higher profit than production supply.
Small lots, on demand, ad hoc orders. It's not like production line. We're making 1 million electronic devices, and we want to get the lowest cost on every single component, and we negotiate for 3 months to get that. That's really the Arrow and Avnet business. On the other hand, vastly bigger lots that they ship, and so their service costs per dollar are a lot lower. And a lot of the inventory for Avnet and Arrow, I don't know this for sure, but I bet it probably never reaches their dock. It's probably either supplier direct fulfillment, or if it's docked, it's just cross-docked, so it comes off one track and goes out on another.
Well, also when you get in that production world of Arrow and Avnet, you have SKUs that cost far less than a penny.
That's probably right. Yeah.
Right, where you have to have literally several hundred or several thousand SKUs, or maybe even 1 million, to spend $5 with them. It's a pretty interesting.
Could be.
Yeah,
that sounds right. Okay, so let's talk about CULA trade. So this is from SEFA, SEFA, which is the Supply and Equipment Food Association. I think that's what it's called, Supplies and Equipment Food Association. So they're a buying group, right? So they're not. In fact, I almost undoubtedly got the meaning of SEFA wrong, but they're a food equipment buying group. So these are distributors, and so they're taking. I think they've got 56 distributors, and they're taking that strength of relationships with food equipment manufacturers and distributors and turning it around and making a marketplace. So the CULA stands for culinary, right? And so the notion is that they're going to pool the resources of these food supply and equipment distributors to create an assortment and services that are bigger than anyone of them could build on their own. And you were actually the first person who ever said to me, I think buying groups are the natural home of marketplaces, Jonathan. I think that's exactly right, but I never thought of it until you said it. So why don't you go on about that?
Well, I think part of it is just in terms of where your thoughts might have been, was that you felt like the marketplaces needed to have broader than just, say, electrical or food service or Jansan. But I think if you step away from that notion that it needs to be more than one industry segment, the buying groups end up being a great target for this. They're far more mercantile, if you will, than associations. They're used to handling lots of money. They're used to handling suppliers, rebates, all the things that go into making a buying group or a co-op. And I think what's interesting, depends kind of on the configuration of the buying group or co-op. This particular one, Ian, I think you said has like 55 members. So this is a smaller one where you don't necessarily have the long tail of really small distributors as members. So if you look at a lot of the buying groups, they have 500, 1,000 members, and you have half of that membership is 10 million and less in revenue, right? It's by definition small. So I think there's different kind of design options or objectives depending on what the constitution of the buying group is. But I think it's a natural to create value for the members. You're giving them exposure to the market. Somebody goes to search for a product, and then they put in an area code, or perhaps the location is already baked into what they're doing. And then a set of distributors that are in that area come up. So
Right.
I think those are great topics for industry specific aggregation.
Yeah, yeah. But by the way, I looked up SEFA because I knew I got the name wrong, and it stands for Supply and Equipment Food Service Alliance. So my apologies to the SEFA folks, but that's what it stands for. And it's really interesting that you put it in those terms, Jonathan, because I think one of the things that struck me while you were talking was this notion of, does a marketplace have to span verticals? So, out there that have every type of product, no matter what the vertical is, from industrial to food service equipment, to HVAC. But these are really, industry specific or vertical specific marketplaces. And my question is, how broad does it have to become in order to be legitimate in terms of the verticals? Can you do a marketplace within a specific vertical, or does it by definition have to span many verticals?
I think you and I sit on different sides on that one, Ian. I mean,
Yeah.
I think if you're aggregating, so we have a question here, by the way, that's related to this. So isn't this
Yeah.
what AD, meaning affiliated distributors, is trying to do with their new web initiative? I'm less familiar with that, but I've heard that they are moving in that direction. They certainly have enough muscle.
Yeah.
The AD, last I looked, was a $50 billion volume kind of business in 7 different sectors. So there's certainly enough volume there in aggregate, or even in any one of the individual sectors, to say, yeah, we represent a lot. And if you look at the AD initiative, each one of those sectors has got, 1 million SKUs or more, right? So I think in answer to your question, or to your thinking about, do you have enough assortment? You got 1 million SKUs. That's in a particular sector. That's pretty extraordinary, actually. That's going to cover 99+% of what people want, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what to think about this issue, because as you said, my starting point has been, you can't have a single vertical marketplace, because then it's not really a marketplace. The notion of a marketplace is that it's, got extraordinary assortment that spans verticals and has millions of SKUs. But I don't know. I mean, I think, it's hard to look at DigiKey and think that they can't build differentiation with an electronic components marketplace, or Trade can't build differentiation with a restaurant supply marketplace, because, are you ever going to look at one of the big verticals and get that depth of product information and expertise? And, if you're a restaurant operator, are you going to find that Trade over time is differentiated from an Amazon business? I mean, I don't know the answer to that.
Well, one thing that may be a requirement if you're doing a more or less vertical specific marketplace is that you have the things that look like stocking stuffers that go along with it. So if you're doing a plumbing marketplace, you've got safety and PPE. You've got perhaps Jansan. There's some other categories of products that are starting to look like stocking stuffers.
Right.
So I think as long as you've got a reasonable assortment of the stocking stuffers along with the core vertical products, it can work.
So what's the material? There's a material handling marketplace. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I'm trying to look it up now, so pardon me. And he actually spoke at NAW in January when I did.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm not sure. I can't. It'll come to me. But he's got 7 million SKUs just in material handling.
Wow, phenomenal.
But I will tell you, he's growing like crazy. So apparently, there's something about that vertical because my guess is you can find a lot of those parts in other broader marketplaces. But he's like disrupting that industry. And you could argue that, there are these companies that aren't marketplaces, but they're super broad, like Rock Auto and auto parts, or Webstrat store in restaurant equipment and supplies. And they have their own product managers and warehousing and shipping. I don't think they're selling third parties at all, but they're still growing like crazy because there is just this magic to an extraordinary level of assortment. And yet they're both within specific verticals. So you could be right. I don't know. My starting point was you had to span multiple verticals to be a legitimate marketplace. I would say the data in the market says that that's not necessarily the case, and the jury's out. Is that fair?
Seems fair to me. You're
Okay.
basically you're saying I'm right, is what I'm hearing.
I'm saying it looks like you could be right. And by the way, I don't know anything about what AD is doing. So if
Okay.
you know something beyond that, I mean, I haven't talked to them. So they do seem like a natural entity to build a marketplace to me, though.
Yeah. Well, again, you just think about the muscle they have with their size.
Yeah.
How many $50 billion distributor entities are there? Well, in the hard goods space, the largest that we know of right now would be Sonopar. We haven't seen Amazon's numbers recently, and then you get into the non-durable goods space, and you've got the pharmaceutical guys, you've got the food guys, but there aren't many $50 billion entities. So I
No.
think they've got enough muscle to make this happen.
Yeah, it's a good point. And it's interesting because they've been working on collaboration between distributors from the start. And I think that's a hard thing to make happen. I mean, when you go to an AD meeting, I don't think I've ever been to one, but I would assume you've got direct competitors strolling all over the place, right?
No question. I mean, here's where you may not have direct competitors all over the place is in a cooler trade. The one you have here in the middle, the restaurant supply. When it's small enough, sometimes the buying groups and co-ops are organized in a way that by definition there is not competitive or geographic overlap.
I bet they are. I bet they do have competitors. I didn't check, but I bet they do. So let's jump ahead to the third one that we have on the screen for you radio listeners, and that's Zorro. So Zorro is a Grainger division that was itself launched to be a separate business unit protected from its parent, more of a low-cost entity, but they sort of quietly several months ago launched the Zorro Supplier Partner Program, which is a marketplace. And I've talked to them a couple times. There are people there, and they play their cards very close to the vest. So I haven't really learned much other than what's on this page, but it's clear that they're aware of the marketplace phenomenon, and they're starting to work to provide their own. I'm just not hearing much about this program, and it's making me wonder how much progress they're making. Are you hearing anything from anybody on this, Jonathan?
Not a ton. I mean, you and I have had a couple discussions with them, and they're earlier going, but in terms of what's market facing, it's been a little bit in stealth mode, I would say.
Yeah, well, they could be. They're just not ready to do a big announcement yet. This may be the soft launch, but I think they need to move quickly if they want to be a player because of the environment. Okay, so there's several different companies that provide software if you want to build your own marketplace. We have no financial arrangements with any of these companies, so we're not spinning anything. We're just sort of reporting the facts. We've only talked to one of them, and that's Miracle, which I believe is the market leader based on sort of how visible they are in the marketplace, so to speak, as well as the nature of the clients that they have. So these are two screenshots. One is their homepage, and then one is a list of brands for whom they have built marketplaces. And like I said earlier, I believe they also built a DigiKey marketplace. I'm not sure why it's not on here. But anyway, so we had a good conversation with Adrian Nussbaum. Was that his name?
Correct.
That his name?
Yes.
Yeah, Adrian Nussbaum. Sorry, Adrian, if for not remembering exactly, but he's the CEO of Miracle. It was a pretty compelling conversation, I thought. He's a smart guy, and he was generous with his time. What were your takeaways from that conversation, Jonathan?
First of all, I think they've got huge momentum.
Yeah.
Second of all, they've got a marketplace platform that can fit a number of different models. So if you sort of categorize the logo slide there, so on the one hand, you've got Avnet, okay, that is a distributor. On the other hand, you got ABB right below it, who is a manufacturer.
Right.
And then over to the right in the middle, you've got Kroger, who's a retailer.
Yeah.
So they've really been able to create a marketplace solution that supports different models of marketplaces, right? So the ABB model is presumably one where they're working with their distributors and end customers. Avnet, I don't know as much about that one. You were asking about that before, but you can imagine that that is a multi-distributor one. So there's a variety of different models available in their platform, which I think is impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I was impressed with that. I mean, I'd like to talk to the others. We haven't tried to reach out to them, so that's not a complaint of any kind. But I would like to talk to the others. But I thought Adrian was a smart person, and he had good answers and a thoughtful approach, and an impressive list of clients. So I would say if I was, running e-commerce for distributors still, I'd be talking to some of these marketplace software providers, and Miracle would certainly be on the list. We did have someone, by the way, add a comment that says Zorro is struggling to gain critical mass and get out of the gate successfully. Ooh, inside information potentially. I don't know. Well, not literally, not like shareholder inside information. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think these guys are pretty impressive, and so Miracle. If you don't see the slides, Miracle is spelled Mirakl. That's Mirakl, and they appear to be one of the companies you should talk to if you're thinking about building a marketplace. I didn't even notice the Avnet logo on here, Jonathan. I'm glad you pointed it out, because that's already two in electronic components.
Right.
So, I mean, how many can there be in electronic? Do you think there can only be one per vertical to be successful?
Definitely not.
No?
Nope.
So you think Avnet and DigiKey could both succeed with their own marketplace?
Yes. We had another comment here from a company that's doing a manufacturer-based marketplace, and they're looking at Miracle as the basis for their marketplace. So just a data point for you.
Good. All right. And we know those guys who just commented. They're impressive. They know what they're doing.
We know everybody, Ian.
What? Okay. So these are, I just put on the screen. So for you podcast listeners, I put on 4 different marketplace providers, and let me read them off real quick, just so you can take, if you're taking notes or you want to come back to this portion of the recording, you can. One of them is called Avetti, Avetti. Another one is called Yellow, Yelo. There's also Isberg, Izberg, and Marketplacer. So you know what? Before we start this discussion, I have a complaint.
Is it the grammar on the get a better alternate to Miracle?
No, although I didn't even notice that. That's a French company, I believe. So apparently something got lost in translation.
Okay.
But here's what bothers me about these web pages. So apparently the current design philosophy for a website is to make the logo as small as possible and stick it up in the left-hand corner of the web page. What is the deal with that?
It's an ageist thing to discriminate against our age, whose vision is fading and forcing us to squint.
I just think that's so dumb. I mean, if you had a truck with your logo on it, you'd use up the whole side panel if you could. Right?
Yeah, you'd use 800-point font.
Right. And I don't understand why. And, sometimes, I mean, I love working with designers, but sometimes they're so concerned about the elegance of the look and feel that they lose they lose the thread on what it's about. This is a great example. I mean, you could look at all 4 of these pages and navigate away and have no idea who the supplier was. But anyway, okay. So these are 4 of them. We've not talked to these people. We looked them up. There's a big typo on one of the pages, as Jonathan pointed out, for Yellow. But it's, that the people who have the grammar problem, their headline is "Get a better alternate to Miracle." So Miracle, I mean, typically when you see that kind of comparison, they think that company they're comparing themselves to is the market leader. But I mean, I think so. What do you think the odds are that these companies are venture backed, Jonathan?
Pretty high.
So when you're looking to do business with a venture backed company, there are considerations other than technical that you need to take into account, right?
Like viability?
Yes, that's where I was going. So how do you screen? I mean, because look, you got the best solution in the world, but if you go out of business in a year, it doesn't matter.
Well, I think if you look at, what the Gartners and IDCs do when they cover a sector, one of the things they look at is viability, and part of
Okay.
viability is how far they are into the market, measured in number of deployed, ongoing customers. And then another thing that they look at in viability is the actual financial backing, the amount of runway they have. So I think Gartner looks at strength of vision and ability to execute, and
Hmm.
viability is related to the ability to execute, right?
Yeah.
So
So, I mean, and by the way, I think Miracle's venture back too. But the question I always asked when I was in industry was, you know, what's your runway? What do you have left?
mhm,
What's your burn rate?
mhm.
And it's interesting. It's funny how Silicon Valley firms are sort of disconnected from the rest of the business world. Because if you talk to any other company, like a traditional company, they'll brag about their sales growth. Venture companies brag about their last fundraising round.
Right, but at a certain point, and we keep coming back to Miracle. I mean, Miracle is
Yeah.
either actually or approaching PE, private equity level funding,
Oh,
as opposed to venture, right? I mean, they're graduating, or they
I'm not
have
saying
graduated.
being venture is a bad thing. I'm
Yeah,
saying you be careful when you start partnering with a venture backed company, because I've done that with companies that have not made it, and then you're kind
right.
of stuck holding the bag. But anyway, okay. So with these companies, I think they're all these are not traditional e-commerce companies. So this is not Big Commerce or Shopify or Magento. I mean, you really have to understand that a marketplace company is a different animal, right? And so, they will have, excuse me, hang on, sorry. They will provide for things that you wouldn't get in normal e-commerce software, because you're coordinating shipping, fulfillment with third parties, which isn't the case with a normal e-commerce platform, right?
That's right. Well, and if we harken back to one of our prior episodes, you were talking about what happens if you get disintermediated too much, you cease to be a distributor,
Yeah, right. If you give up
right?
too many of your distribution functions, you're not a distributor, right?
Right.
Yeah, so I think these are, there may be others. We didn't do a comprehensive search. These are basically when I'm looking for competitors to a company, I put that company versus and see who comes up. So I did Miracle versus, and these are the first four or the most prominent four that came up. So we're not endorsing anybody or tearing anybody down. I think you should talk to, if you're interested in building a marketplace, you need to understand what a marketplace is, which we've tried to accomplish on this call. Differentiate a marketplace from an e-commerce marketplace. Now let's talk about some of the considerations in the next few minutes, Jonathan. So first, not every distributor can build its own marketplace. So I hear what you're saying about DigiKey and Avnet. Maybe you're right. But if every distributor builds a marketplace, you're just right back to where we are today with everybody running their own website. There's not that much difference between the two, right?
Correct. Unless we're looking at that model where it's kind of like a headless thing, where the marketplace is in the background and you're presenting through your website, through your e-commerce site, this much, much broader assortment of SKUs than you actually carry. But I think also, if you look at what you're saying, that not every, your prior question was, can we have more than one? And this is the other end of the extreme. Can
Yep.
everybody build one? Well, certainly not everybody can build one. But probably more than one could build one, depending on the sector. There are certain sectors that are more consolidated. So if you look at industrial, it's vast. There's lots of room in industrial. If you look at gas and welding,
Mm.
there's probably a couple hundred distributors in that space, and in 2 or 3 years, there's going to be 150 or 100. I mean, it's consolidating very quickly. So I think a lot of it depends on the dynamics and the competitive landscape of the sector that you're in.
Right, right. I think your point about buying groups is really important. I just think it's the likely way to go. I think in many cases the widest assortment player may be the best candidate. Because you have this foundational level of SKUs, but I don't think anybody's got a wider assortment than buying group. I mean, I know it's a different kind of assortment because they're not selling them jointly typically, But you can't, if you're a $10 million distributor with 10,000 SKUs, God bless you if you're trying to build a marketplace, but you're in for a long, long, hard putt, right?
Well, yeah, and I think also the widest assortment is a marker that indicates other things that position you to do this well. One, you've created enough relationships with suppliers. Two, you've probably got a more mature e-commerce platform. So having a more mature, meaning I don't mean as in not too old, but I mean as in has made a lot of progress mature, is probably a prerequisite if somebody's looking to lead this kind of initiative. Going back to DigiKey, I mean, they've crushed it in their space.
Yeah, right,
They've outpaced companies that are 14 times their size, right?
right.
And they're growing much faster than the market. So I think this widest assortment is actually a marker for other things that are relevant as being a candidate to go do this on your own.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's probably right. And I think I think in this case, assortment doesn't just mean access to manufacturer products. I mean, this is your own assortment that you actually inventory.
Mhm.
At least that's how I think about it. Okay, so buying groups, and I've been saving this comment. I think the more I've thought about your buying group point, the more I agree with it, and here's why. Everything we've said about DigiKey or Zorro or other distributors building their own marketplaces, it's legitimate. They may do it. They may succeed. I hope they do. I genuinely hope they do. But I think it's hard to get competitors to sell on your site.
Right.
And does it happen? Sure. People sell on Walmart.com. People sell on Amazon or Amazon Business. People sell on, other marketplaces. But the reality is they're just inherently a competitor. Institutionally, they've been your enemy or your rival for decades. And now you're going to sell on a site that's branded by them. And you're going to, at least emotionally concede leadership to them in your segment. I just don't know that you can get past those emotional considerations, at least in the short term.
Yeah, I mean, there's the adage, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer.
Yeah.
So you have to really be able to live that, or as you're saying, actually overcome that hurdle to be able to sell on a competitor's marketplace.
Yeah. And where's the trust? I mean, you've already got cases of, marketplaces getting themselves in trouble over one in particular, over,
Right.
so allegedly using competitors' data or third-party suppliers' data in a way that they said they wouldn't. And, I mean, and I think there's more trust of a company like DigiKey or Grainger/Zorro than there are some others. But still, I just don't know, man. The buying groups have already gotten past that. And that's why I brought it up earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, have you been to AD meetings?
No, I haven't. I've been to IMARC.
IMARC? Okay. Yeah, that's a good example too, right? So let's
Yeah.
talk about IMARC for a second. I've never been to an IMARC meeting. What's the environment like there among all those ruthless competitors?
Well, there's a level of collaboration
Right.
and information that's shared for the benefit of all of the members. But I've been to a really small buying group, one with 10 members.
Right.
Average member is doing 70 to 75 million dollars of revenue a year, maybe even 80 or 100, versus average members doing 10 or 15 million.
Right.
So the tone in that smaller buying group is thoroughly collaborative. They're all about sharing best practices because they're not competing.
Right.
So it's an unguarded type of interaction, whereas in a other type of buying group where there's tons of competitors, they're sharing, but there's a little bit of guardedness, I would say.
But they've worked it out.
They've worked it out, yes. Or they'll have, they'll recruit a you or a me or a Jason to go present at one of these buying groups, right?
Right.
Or co-ops, to share the information so that no individual member is being asked to share information that they don't want to share.
So we have a very long-term friend of ours, absolute expert in distribution, who's just made a comment. Buying group meetings, in my experience, have been remarkably collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's funny when you bring people together, like you see this at conferences, right? Where, when I was at Whitecap, I remember I was standing there and some C-level person from Fastenal came over and struck up a conversation. And he wasn't prying me for information. It was like curiosity, right?
Right.
And and you wind up presenting to each other at conferences. And I just think there's this dynamic that creates a bridge for collaboration.
Well, and I would also say that in those buying groups, competitive CEOs are friends with one another and go out to dinner with one another. So,
Boy, that's the truth. I remember when I was at Granger, we weren't allowed to say anything negative about McMaster Car because the
right.
Granger family and the family that owned McMaster Car were friends.
Yep.
And there's a certain nobleness to that that I like.
I
You
agree.
know,
Yep.
and okay, and that really leads to this point, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that also goes back to the buying groups thing, that the collaboration that occurs there in product data and what's going on in market dynamics. Those same organizations are also often looking at demand estimation. What's the market size? How do we share that information with our members? So they do require collaboration. I think one of the things that we really have to cover here, it's almost a notable absence, perhaps intentional, but is what is the effect of COVID on all of these considerations?
Hmm.
And so if we think about what's happened with COVID, it's accelerated by at least 3 years end user adoption of digital, if not 5,
Yeah, that's right.
right?
Because it was forced. There's no issue. No,
It
no,
was
no choice.
forced. And so we've done our own research on what's happening with distributor e-commerce. We're coming out with a blog soon, white paper soon on, I think it's going to be called Digital, the Time is Nigh, but we're also going to be looking at research from Forrester, which is showing the number of end customers who for the first time are buying digitally, who are now buying things that they didn't buy digitally before. Um, the data from a Forrester, from McKinsey, from HubSpot is overwhelming. It's overwhelming. Literally, we've shot forward 3 to 5 years in terms of end users. So
Yeah.
I think all of that bodes well for whether it's a good old e-commerce site or one of these newfangled marketplaces, is that the market is ready.
Do you think? Okay, so by the way, one of the effects of COVID was that I missed my first ever iMark meeting. You and I were
There you
supposed to
go.
do a workshop on how to build services, and we never got to do it. And I was really bummed about that. And by the way, they were very classy about how they handled that whole
Totally.
situation, I thought.
Totally.
But so you've got iMark and AD. You're a lot closer to buying groups than I am. Are they the big two in distribution?
Yeah, but there's a good long list. I mean, there's a consolidation of buying groups,
Right, I
and
heard about that. Right,
those are the consolidators.
right.
Maybe some of our listeners know, but better than I. But as last I looked, AD had bought 4 or 5 or 6 billion-dollar plus buying groups or co-ops in the last 24 months.
So let me ask you this: is there a place for an industry wide? So as wide as the NAW is, I'm not saying the NAW should run it. By the way, I'm just
Mhm.
using it using them to explain breadth of verticals. Is there a room or a need, or is it possible to build a wholesale distribution wide marketplace ranging from food equipment to electronic components to safety products to plumbing to HVAC to power transmission? I mean, you name it, all the verticals that we know about. And and if is there room for that? Is it possible? And if so, who would do it?
Wow, that's a hard one.
I know, and I sprung this on you. You didn't know this was coming. So,
It's
and I
okay.
don't have the answer. So that's why I'm giving it to the doctor of distribution to.
Thank you, smart feller, Ian Heller. Um, yeah, I mean, we can imagine a number of ways this might come together. It could be that the buying groups are coming together, so the electrical guys come together with the plumbing guys, with the HVAC guys, with the fastener guys. There could be that kind of a scenario, or it could be leading players in each sector coming together, right? So it wouldn't have to be the number one player, but you could imagine a scenario where um, one of the leaders in from several different sectors comes together, and
Right.
poof, you've got viability in very, very short order by virtue of the breadth of assortment and the diversity of the items. So
Okay, I love that idea. I love that idea. I think you got it. And this is why you're the doctor of distribution. Because think about like we just looked at Zorro and DigiKey, and we talked about sort of the emotional problems of having, competitors selling through your site, right? But what if you had DigiKey representing electronic components, Granger representing industrial, Ferguson representing plumbing, Sonopar representing electrical. I mean, if they got together, pooled their assortments, and created an entity with a different brand name, which I think, frankly, is essential.
yeah,
Then, I mean, the hard part would be having the conversations and staying out of trouble with the FTC. But if you could do it,
you could kick some major booty.
yeah, yeah. And in fact, we just got an interesting comment from another person who is one of the luminaries in distribution. I'd caution just a bit that you do have to be somewhat guarded in buying groups. We've experienced our friends being acquired by our enemies. M&A complicates, and some groups are more competitive than others. So that's sort of the other side of the happy talk about buying groups, right? This is a person who we know understands the distribution maybe as well as anybody does, right? And certainly has a lot of experience. And what he's saying is buying groups may not be the magic bullet solution. So maybe the idea that you just communicated, Jonathan, is the way to do it. You get these leaders in different verticals together, and you'd have to have a lot of attorneys in the room, I think, right?
It'd be a bonanza for attorneys.
Yeah, it would be. But maybe that's another solution. But so do you think that could happen? I mean, do you think that's possible or likely? How would you rate on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being sure thing, 1 being absolutely not going to happen?
Well, I'd say this is a punt, but I'd say it's a 5 at least on the level of, maybe the construction people get together, the PEM, the plumbing, electromechanical guys
Right.
get together, and maybe you bring in some of the specialty construction players along with that, and then you've got a construction marketplace, or you've got
Right.
an industrial marketplace again, which is so broad that there's room for many players. And if we were to just think of if we were to name industry leaders in industrial, it's not just Granger, right? I mean,
Right.
there's 10 or 20 serious
Absolutely.
players in that
Yep.
space,
That's
right?
correct. That's
So
correct.
so I think the odds of something like that happening are pretty good. I'd actually kind of like to go do it myself, frankly.
Yeah, I hear you. I tell you, the other thing though is you can't participate in any of this if you're not world class with e-commerce.
That's right.
I
That's a
mean,
prerequisite.
yeah, you have to be. So you can't get around it by going, oh, we'll just sell in a marketplace, because you don't have the right product data and institutional expertise about e-commerce. You're not going to be able to participate in these at all.
That's right.
And I think the takeaway message here is don't wait. I mean, we've talked about this before, but if you don't have marketplace thinking in your strategy is useless. That sounds like an overstatement, but if it was 1995 and you were developing a strategy for a distribution company and you didn't have e-commerce in your strategy, how good and useful would your strategy be? Not.
You'd be missing a major component. And just to clarify, I mean, we've done a recent survey as part of this work we're doing for NAW, and I'm not going to reveal all the gory detail, but one of the questions we asked is the number of folks that are what they're doing with marketplaces, and a number of them are participating in more than one marketplace.
Right.
I think of those who are participating in marketplaces right now, about 30% are doing more than one marketplace, and about 8% of the respondents are doing 4 or more marketplaces.
Wow.
So those companies are out in front, seeing what works.
Yeah, they should be. You should be experimenting.
You should be experimenting, exactly, right? And there's a lot of ways to experiment. You
Right.
could take excess and obsolete. You could take long tail.
Right.
You could take head. You have to think about what the experiment is that you want to run,
Right.
and think about it from a competitive lens as well. But there's any number of ways to run an experiment to see how it works.
That's absolutely right. I agree completely. All right. So if you have questions or if you just want to reach out and complain, yell, compliment,
I wish we could
ask us
provide people a
questions,
way to throw tomatoes.
as long as they're not in the can. That's my policy.
How about eggs?
Eggs are fine.
Eggs are fine. Okay, eggs
Um,
and fresh tomatoes.
yeah. So, but if you do want to reach us, these are our phone numbers and our email addresses. And then on the right, one more time, this is the white paper series, the research report and webinar series that we're producing with the NAW. If you go to naw.org, it's in their top rotating banner, or you can go to the URL below. That's going to wrap it up for today. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Wholesale Change. And Jonathan, my business partner, wonderful conversation. Great talking to you as usual. Everyone have a wonderful day. Thanks again for joining us. Bye now.